So, all right, so back on page, yeah, back on page 101. Sorry about that. So the first 100 people, right, who wrote this book, right, this is their diary, this is their journal, right, this is what they said they did, right, and so in their belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield you from temptation is doomed to failure. If you try to shield yourself, you may succeed for a while, but usually wind up with a bigger explosion than ever. So look back on your own experience, is that true? Mm-hmm. Right, when you're in these little recovery homes and these treatment centers, right, most of the time you can stay sober. Right, so you're shielding yourself. And so what happens when you leave those places? Right? Yep. All right, so it says, so our rule is not to avoid a place where there's drinking if we have a legitimate reason for being there. Yeah, so this idea of triggers is good for therapy, and I guess it could possibly be for you first start out.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, because the book doesn't say anything about that, right? But I'm sure when you first start out, right, it's, well,
until you've done all your steps.
You know what, let me just discuss, I'll tell you this discussion that a couple of us had this morning, right? Because what we're witnessing here is we're witnessing about 5 or 6 people constantly get drunk here. Right, about 5 or 6 people constantly get drunk. And so the discussion was, I kind of stepped into 2 of the men having this talk, is that they could feel the drink coming on 2 weeks ahead of time. Right, it's kind of like it's building up. And so I'm telling you, so my point at that moment was, well, then you just don't want to stop. You don't want to stop. Right? Information says you should stop, right? Or going to stop, or I need to stop. But the bottom line is that you don't want to stop. And at this moment, on page 34, please. And at this moment, if you don't want to stop, I mean, if you truly don't want to stop, then this is not going to work. This is not going to work. These steps are not intended to convince you that you need to stop. Or if you don't want to stop, these steps won't help you at all. That's the bottom line. Halfway down, page 34. Yeah, for those who are unable to drink moderately, right, the question is how to stop altogether. It doesn't say one day at a time. Right, it says altogether. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. What does the next line say? So if the reader, if the person doesn't want to stop drinking, if they have some sort of lurking notion in there that somehow they can beat the game, and they can just have one, or it doesn't really matter, then this will never work. Yes, sir?
Well, that's why it says, the requirement is to, that you want to stop drinking. If, I can't even say it, I just have it in my head. But the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking.
Right, you're right. So the only requirement, absolutely. So what Charles said was the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. If you don't have that desire, this is not going to work.
What do you do?
Right, this is not going to work. Yes, ma'am?
What if you want to stop? But
Then it's never going to work.
That obsession's still kind of there, but we're trying to get rid of it.
What her question is what happens if she wants to stop? It'll never work. So on page 34 it says, whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent which has already lost the power to choose whether she'll drink or not. Many of us felt we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism, this utter inability to leave it alone, regardless of the necessity or the wish. And so another part of this conversation was we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost self. Concede is not surrender. Concede is not surrender. What does concede mean?
Admit.
I think Jeff was talking about it, Jason was talking about it. Concede is it doesn't matter if you like the outcome, you lost. It doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. It is what it is.
It's like, if you're not conceding,
Well, what she just said is that you acknowledge that you lost. And I don't agree that I lost.
Got beat.
I got beat.
The war's over.
The war's over. I may not like the result, I may not even agree with it.
Like waving a white flag.
No, I mean, it's this eternal thing. Now, this is so important to understanding the illness. This is so important to understanding the illness. Does the illness need your consent to exist? It does not need your permission, right? It doesn't care if you agree with it or not. And the illness doesn't care if you accept it or not.
Just like cancer, just like
Yeah, right.
diabetes.
Yeah, Charles.
so one of the biggest problems that I had over the years where people would see me go in and out, you know, and I would tell myself like, gee, I wonder if I conceded, like my innermost self, like, what does that mean? Da, 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 da. And it was only this last time around when I really internalized this whole thing. It's like, it's accepting something as true or valid after first having denied or resisted
Yeah.
it. And I was like, damn, that's me, you know? And I knew that this last time it came around that was no longer the case.
Right.
That I was like, I
You
had
got
skin in
beat.
the game and that was it. Yeah.
You got beat.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to look at this, and Charles is saying that it took him a long time to figure out he got beat rather than he lost. You know, if I lose something, that means that there's something I could do better. Right? If I lost a ball game, right, that means that, that I made a mistake. You know, that I could do something better. If I could just hit better, if I could just run faster, right? But when I get beat, there's nothing left I can do. I've done this over and over again, and I keep getting beat. It keeps winning. And so why would I continue to fight? And so the big thing is here, if you be alcoholic or addict, is it possible you're fighting the wrong battle? If you're fighting alcohol and drugs, and you just keep trying to stay away from them, is it possible you're fighting the wrong battle?
Yeah.
Meaning what?
Meaning that if you fight alcohol and drugs, you're fighting the wrong battle.
It's not the problem.
You're not fighting.
Oh, right.
Right. If you're fighting alcohol, and you think alcohol is the problem, or you're fighting drugs, and you think drugs are the problem,
Right.
you're fighting the wrong battle.
Yeah.
I got you.
You're fighting the wrong battle. So does your history prove that you can win the battle over drugs or alcohol?
No.
So why keep fighting? See, that's the point. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I held this job for 30 years, and you said you can't hold a job if you're an alcoholic.
Well, severe, okay? The real alcoholic. There as a hard drinker, and I guess I'm looking at the way the book presents it. Okay, I'm looking at the way the book presents it, right? Everybody's got a little different story, right? There's no cookie cutter here, okay? And some people call themselves functioning alcoholics. Maybe they are, right? What I'm finding is that like the latter stages of it, right, where people absolutely at a point reached, I got to get help.
Can't hold a job.
Yeah, I can't hold a job. I can't be in relationships, right? And so, at what point did that start to happen to you?
Well, I was sober 10 years in the middle of it in AA.
Uh-huh.
And then when I retired, you know, it was balls to the wall every
Yeah.
day, you know, like.
Right. Well, you fell victim to belief, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety qualified him to drink like other men.
Yeah, but I wasn't sober when I was, you know. I was
But you
sober.
just said you were 10 years sober.
Yeah, 9.5.
Okay.
Why, no.
Well, I mean, you see, not everybody's going to be the same, right? It's what we're trying to do is just try to give it's like an overall view, okay, of what is required to work the steps. Are you working the steps now?
Yes,
Right? Now, how long are you sober now?
like 95 days.
And how many times have you had 95 days? Right, okay.
Just got here.
So the question is that he been trying to get sober for a while? You know, and now he has 95 days. And it's great, but the question, but the reality is we can get sober, we just can't stay sober. Right, and so before you could get sober and stay sober for a little while, but you started drinking again, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, while I was working, I spent time in detox a couple of times because, you know,
Yeah. They talk about in the book is that this description should cover him roughly. Not everybody's going to have the same experience or the same history.
Would you say like the one thing we all share is like a level of desperation that you want to change? And I mean, for everybody's rock bottom is different.
Right,
Like all because you've gone to jail doesn't qualify you
Right.
to be an AA person.
right. That's why the book refers to only 2 questions. And each person has to answer these questions. Right, when you drink, can you guarantee each time how much you're going to drink? And the second question is, if somebody who loved you asks you to stop, can you stop and stay stopped? So in your own experience, is it a question of if you're going to drink or a question of when? That's powerless. So I'm sober almost 27 years. Right, this month is 27 years. And so it's not, I'm equally convinced right now that at 27 years sober, that the time is going to come when I'm going to drink again. I'm convinced of that because of the illness that I have. And so I don't think I'm cured. I don't think there's anything I can let up on a spiritual program of action that I have. I still know that it's not a question of if I drink, it's a question of when. Because I have alcoholism. Does that make sense? It's a constant treatment. It's not a battle, it's a treatment. And so that's what's required here.
So if we're powerless, then aren't we screwed?
I love.
You certainly are. You certainly are. You got no hope at all. Right? All right. So here is the solution to this. Right? Trust God, clean house, work with others. How it works means you get into action. Into action means you work with others. And if you let up on this spiritual program of action, and see, this is where sometimes sponsors' interpretation of the steps really screw up sponsees. And how people read the book kind of screws them up. Do you guys believe that the book says this is a rigorously honest program?
No,
It doesn't say this is a rigorously honest program.
requires.
But everybody will tell you this is a rigorously honest program. That's not what it says. It says grasping and developing a manner of living. See, grasping and developing is the key phrase there that demands rigorous honesty. So are you capable of grasping and developing? Right, that's the key phrase here.
By the work of the steps.
If he were sought, and what is the word, right, Richie? And so what does the word sought mean? That God could and would if he were sought. What is sought?
Look, see,
Not find.
Seek.
Not find.
Seek.
Right, the power's in the seeking here. The power is not in the finding. Right, the freedom is in the seeking of a God, not the finding of a God. Because once you hit one spiritual plateau, what do?
Get another one.
Well, you look around and there's another level to get to. Right, and you look around, there's another level. Oh, boy, I fell off that mountain. Gotta climb back up again. Right, so it's the power's in the seeking, not in the finding.
so you would say like it's the journey's more important than the destination.
Well, I mean, isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
It's a journey, and you know, so this is what we're gonna, right? A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us respective homes, occupations, and affairs. And so the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, and again, I'm just referring to what the book talks about, right? Not what the fellowship talks about, right? But the principles the book specifically lists are inventory, confession, restitution, helpfulness to others, and necessity dependence upon a God. Right? Those are the principles that the book are talking. The book's talking about. We practice these principles, right, in all our affairs, and so a much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us: respect of homes, occupations, and affairs. So these principles are more important in what you do outside of the rooms of AA than what you do inside the rooms of AA.
Yeah.
You know, a much more important demonstration lies before us: respect of homes, occupations, and affairs. Does that make sense? So how do you make these principles part of everyday life for you? I mean, how do you make these? By practice.
Fine.
By practice it. And the first spiritual principle is, can you find your mistakes? Because I can always find somebody else's. That's the very first spiritual principle. And in the inventory, which is what we'll get back to next week, is there's no spiritual exercise in me writing down what you did to me. That's not spiritual at all. There's no spiritual exercise in here in what me trying to find out what my part in this resentment is. That's not spiritual. I'm still thinking about the resentment.
We're gonna lose you again. Can you start do it again? I guess it's just Richie and Sarah.
No, they're there, right there. No, it's here. Anyway, and so the very first spiritual principle is the inventory. And this is where it's gotten so screwed up in AA. Is this inventory. How many columns were there in your inventory?
55, I think.
Right. But there's only 3 in the book.
Right.
So this is where it gets screwed up. And if you screw this up, if you screw the very first spiritual principle up, then the rest of them have no hope. You're not going to get the effect for the rest of them. If you can't find your mistakes, so the inventory is all about you finding your mistakes, not your part. Your mistakes in the relationship, where you're to blame, where your faults. And then you confess those things. How many times have you been afraid to tell somebody who and what you did? So you tell somebody your mistakes. And then what do you do with that information? You go set right your mistakes. So the rest of those little intermediate steps, like step 6 is a question, step 7 is a prayer. That's all they are. There's no work in those steps. It's just a question. You've done a lot of screwed up shit in your life you want to change. Step 7 is a prayer. Step 8, you have a list of all persons you'd harm. You made it when you took inventory. Right? How many people here, their sponsor made them do an 8-step list? It's not in the book.
But I have, sorry to interrupt. There's people I've harmed that are not on my resentment list.
And so if you just turn the page and into action, it covers all of that stuff. It covers all that stuff. And again, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying it's not written in the book that way. Yes, sir.
Those key spiritual principles, where are they listed in the book?
A couple different places, but the very first place is the forward to the 2nd edition, 1 page in.
Sorry, what page?
Forward to the 2nd edition, 1 page in. 4 of the 5 are listed on page 84. I mean, the entire book is based on those 5 spiritual principles. So you're the forward to the 2nd edition, turn 1 page in.
Okay.
For the title page, you turn 1 page in.
Just Roman numeral 15.
And it says, from the doctor, the broker learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he couldn't accept all the tenets of the Oxford group, he was convinced to need a moral inventory, a confession of personality defects. You find them?
No, I'm good.
4th to 2nd edition, right?
XB.
Yeah, forward to the 2nd edition, turn 1 page in.
So, 16.
16, right? Roman numeral?
Yeah, XVII.
Numeral 16,
Oh.
Halfway down the first paragraph. From the
Oh,
doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see it now.
You see it back there?
Yeah.
From the doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he couldn't accept all the tenets of the Oxford group, he was convinced it needed moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and necessity dependence upon a God. And so those are discussed in Bill's story, what Ebby took, these are the steps that Ebby took Bill through. Right, these are the steps, the original 6 steps, I think they're on 243 or 263. Yeah, 263. Right, these are the original 6 steps. And so these are the 5 spiritual principles. I'm thinking that Bill Wilson fucked this thing up, screwed this thing up right from the get-go. But know how he did this? Is that as he was writing the book, and he got to chapter how it works, right, there were still 6 steps. When Bill got to how it works, he took each of those 6 steps and busted it up into 2. And gave people like me way too much stuff to think about. And then you put my ego into it, and I'm going to be articulating and pontificating like crazy. When they all boil down to just 5 simple principles.
Page 5 again?
Forward to the 2nd edition, 1 page in. Right? Can you find your mistakes? Because you can always find somebody else's. Can you confess your mistakes? Can you set right your mistakes? You guys okay, Richie? It's always different. Every Sunday's a little bit different. We cover the same information, but it's always different. Something's always different. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's Nicole's idea. That's not mine. Yeah. So you good back there? So if you were to write up page 263 is the original 6 steps. Right. And the very first one is powerless. Complete deflation. And the other ones are, it's the 5 spiritual principles. So my point is here is that as you go along in this journey and work the steps, you're working these 5 spiritual principles as outlined in this book. Right? What they did is they wrote down how to work these spiritual principles. Right? Which is inventory and confession. They tell you what you're going to say. They tell you the purpose of it. They tell you who to choose for this. Right? They tell you to say everything, to tell them your whole life story. And then once you do that, then they tell you to go home and rest for an hour. An hour. Right? So after your 5th step, instructions are very clear. You go back and you rest for an hour. You not sleep, you rest. And then after that hour, you reopen the book. They're clear-cut instructions. But you open the book, carefully reviewing what you have done. And you consider the first 5 proposals and ask yourself, have you omitted anything? And so this is assuming that you want to stop drinking. If you don't want to stop drinking, none of this stuff is going to work for you. If you need to stop, this won't help you. It'll make you a better drunk. I mean, it'll make you a more spiritually fit drunk, so to speak. But unless you want to stop and you can't, that's the whole thing here. Unless you absolutely, desperately want to stop and you can't. Right, yes, I understand. Page 27 says, yes, replied the doctor, there's exceptions in cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which are once the guiding force in the lives of these men, or some they cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate them. So that's the spiritual experience. Thanks, Richie. Anyway, we're gonna wrap. Close it up with this. Anybody got any questions? Any? Cole, you got anything?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
What's your opinion on these other books
Both.
that aren't the big ones?
Well, they give descriptions on what the purpose of them are. Right. So go to the front of the book, and it gives a detailed description on what they're for.
Breaks it down.
So the 12 and 12. What's the purpose of the 12 and 12?
Recap?
No. What is it? No. It says an interpretive commentary on the AA program by a co-founder. So what's an interpretive commentary? Right, it's opinion. It's not directions that work in the steps. It's not a handbook to the 12 steps. They don't go hand in hand with the big book.
Makes good firewood.
Richie said it makes good firewood. I agree.
And can I just add something, in my opinion, well, it also is Christian.
Yeah.
Well, not in my opinion.
Yeah.
It is because it has the St. Francis prayers and all
Right.
that and stuff, which there's nothing wrong with that either, but it's not a religious program. So just going in, if you're going to recommend it to somebody, I think that's important too.
Traditions too.
But yeah, it gives a good description in other traditions.
Yes.
But the 12 has nothing to do with working the steps. Nothing to do with working the steps. Okay, so what's the next one? A comes to A's, a brief history of A's, right? Okay. As Bill sees it. So this is what I love about Bill Wilson. I love this about Bill Wilson. In Bill's story, on page 14, right, Bill writes, simple but not easy, a price had to be paid. It meant the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn into the Father God who presides over all. So Bill knows that his ego is not his ego, right? He says self-centeredness is his problem. So what does he do? He writes a book as Bill sees it. So I know I'm in good company. Because if I could write a book as Paul sees it, I would. But I don't. I just try to interpret what's here.
Maybe your story will be in one of the.
No, my stories will not be in one of the 8th or 10th editions. It won't be. Because I don't write well enough for that to happen. I don't punctuate. I have a mental illness. Huh?
I'll be your ghostwriter.
Okay. Ruth, you got anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Oh, and you got anything? All right, so 7 tradition states every group will be fully self-supporting. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.